Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's meditation session. My name is Christopher Luard, and I'd like to offer a little bit of information about myself before we get started. So, I've been practicing meditation for about 37 years now. I started when I was quite young. When I was 13 years old, I started meditating. And I've really made it a life's work. I've been teaching since 2009, and I've trained very, very deeply in many of the Buddhist traditions of meditation, the early schools of Buddhism, the later schools of Buddhism. I've also trained quite intensely in the more Western secular forms of meditation, such as nonviolent communication, trauma-sensitive mindfulness, insight meditation, and many, many others. I've written 2 books. I wrote my first book in 2016 and my second book in 2020. And I've been lucky enough to really travel the world offering these teachings. I've been now to 96 countries teaching mindfulness and meditation. So it's been a very wonderful career so far. So really happy to be here today with Balanced Veterans Network. So thank you for having me, and once again, thank you for being here. And so for today, we're going to explore a guided meditation around self-compassion. There's many, many, many scientific studies done around the benefits of self-compassion and really holding ourselves in that way. There are many teachers and therapists who talk about self-compassion as the ability to speak to ourselves the way we would speak to our own best friend. So that's really the endeavor here, is where we're cultivating a way of being, an intention to hold ourselves in that esteem, to really honor ourselves in that way. So I want to offer just a little bit of a frame of the guided meditation, and then we'll actually do the practice. And so the way I offer it is that I guide us into the present moment. We start by connecting to what's here right now in this moment. And there are many ways of connecting to the present moment. Many teachers offer it in different methods. For me, I like to start with the experience of sound, because sounds are always present moment experiences, right? We can imagine a concert that we might see 2 weeks from now, but we can't put earplugs in for the volume of that concert until we get there, right? And likewise, we can remember perhaps a Mozart sonata or our favorite song, but we can't turn the volume up in our memory, so to speak, right? So sounds are always present moment. And the reason why I like to start there, well, there are a couple of reasons why that's beneficial. It's quite common that we have this preconceived notion, perhaps, that when we start meditating, that things should be very quiet. And if you've tried meditating before, you might know that that's often not the case, right? There's often an abundance of sound wherever we are. And so in this practice, we begin to use the sounds more as a support rather than something that we should try to ignore or get rid of somehow. So we'll start with the experience of sound, and we'll just spend a few moments connecting to whatever sounds are present. If your environment is really quiet, you might just simply listen to the silence that's there, the stillness of that. And then we'll be invited to bring awareness into the body. And so I want to say a little bit about that. The way I do this is we kind of gradually move through the body, starting perhaps with the feet or the legs, the ankles, so forth, and inviting the muscles in the body to relax and grow soft and rest. And I want to mention here that there may be areas of the body that are uncomfortable to bring awareness to. that are for some reason activating or triggering in any way. And so if that's the case for you, please feel free to modify the practice. So for example, if I have a really painful shoulder and I'm going through the body with my awareness and I get to the shoulder, there's no reason to stay there. We can just connect with the sensations of the discomfort and then move our awareness somewhere else. Because really the intention of the sounds, the body, the intention there is to connect to the present moment. So it really doesn't need to be a grin and bear it kind of practice. So going through the body and then shifting, modifying the practice as we see fit, like that. And then there's often the challenge of the thinking mind, right? Because again, if you've even tried to meditate for a few moments, you might know how the mind wants to wander. Right? Some people get really alarmed about that. Wow, my mind is really everywhere. And just to know that that's normal. The mind will want to think, particularly during meditation practice. It seems like it gets even more active sometimes in the mind. And so the technique that I use in my own practice and that I offer when I teach is when you notice that you're distracted by thoughts, to say the word thinking to yourself. And you could say it 2 or 3 times, thinking, thinking, thinking. Usually by the 3rd or 4th time, that thought is dissolved. And then we can just gently return back to the present moment. There's no need to berate ourselves for getting distracted often in meditation, because it happens to everyone. It's a normal part of the meditation practice. And each time we return back to the present moment, we say thinking, thinking, we come back to the breath, the body, the sounds. Each time we go through that process, it's like we're lifting weights. We're getting just slightly stronger each time we come back to the present moment. We're getting slightly stronger in our capacity to stay connected to the here and now. So there's great benefit in just that process of getting distracted and returning, getting distracted and returning, like that. So getting discouraged by the amount of thoughts you might have, it's like going to the gym and getting discouraged by the amount of weights there are in the gym. Right? You wouldn't say, I can't work out here because there's too many weights in the gym. Right? Similarly to our mind, there's no reason to get discouraged by the amount of thoughts, because each thought represents an opportunity to get a little bit stronger with our awareness. I'm just going to grab a sip of water here. Okay. So that's the groundwork for the compassion practice. So it'll take us roughly 7 to 10 minutes to really connect to the present moment through the breath, the body, the sounds. And then in that silence, in that connection to the present moment, we offer phrases of compassion to our own heart. And so I'll just read through the phrases so there's no surprise there. So the first phrase is, may I feel safe. The second phrase, may I be free from struggle. The third phrase, may I be free from disturbance and harm. And the last phrase, may I live with ease. And so we're really bringing these into our own heart. And the invitation there is to really feel into the implication of each phrase. Now, it's quite normal to feel some resistance around those phrases. That's fine. And for now, just politely putting the resistances to one side and continuing to offer the phrases to your heart. It can also be helpful to place a hand over the heart when we get into the phrases, and I'll offer that as a prompt when we get into the guiding of the meditation. Now, a couple of times in this introduction, I've used the word invitation. And so I want to highlight that everything that I offer is an invitation. And so just like I mentioned when we're bringing awareness through the body, if I offer a prompt that doesn't feel right for you or doesn't seem to allow you to settle, disregard that prompt or just let it go. There may be prompts that don't land for everyone, and that's normal too. It's not that you're doing it wrong or anything like that. It's not a one size fits all type of practice. So if a prompt comes into the meditation, it doesn't land well, or you're not sure what to do with it, just let it go and continue resting. There will be other prompts that you might resonate with in a more wholesome way. So I think that's the introduction. That's all I need to say about that. Oh, I do want to say one more thing about the phrases. As I mentioned, there can be resistance to the phrases. That's normal. That's fine. You might feel a warmth, an opening towards the phrases, and just to be with that. If you feel the heart softening, or perhaps the shoulders or the abdomen softening as you move into the phrases, great. That's one of the great benefits of a practice like this. You may not feel much or anything at all from offering the phrases to your own heart, and that also is normal. And just know that then the seeds are being planted. This is the type of practice that one can return to time and time again, and eventually those seeds do bear fruit. Okay, I have spoken enough. So we will do this meditation roughly 15 to 20 minutes or so. And so if you would just take a moment to get into your most comfortable meditation posture, whatever that means for you. And meditation can be done really in any posture, whether you like to sit on a chair, reclining, or seated up, or traditionally on a cushion on the floor, or you could lie down or stand up, however you're comfortable. And also feel free to change posture in the middle of the practice. There's no need for one to sit still during meditation. If you feel like your body wants to move in a certain way, feel free. And also this meditation can be done with your eyes open or closed. If you choose to open your eyes during the meditation, I would suggest perhaps having the gaze downward so that your eyes can relax. I'll just take one more sip of water and then we'll move in. Okay. So in a few moments' time, I'll ring the bell and I'll guide us in. And at the end of the meditation, there will be 3 bells as a signal for the end of the practice. And so the invitation here is just to arrive into this present moment. And there are many ways of arriving and connecting to the present moment. And for this practice, I think we can start with the experience of sound. And so the invitation here then is to simply listen to the soundtrack of this present moment. You might notice quiet, subtle sounds, or there might be loud, obvious sounds. You might notice sounds generated by nature, such as bird songs or crickets chirping. There might be a dog barking in the distance or a conversation unfolding nearby. You might notice sounds generated by electronics, appliances, or machinery. The hum of a heater or a fan or an air conditioner. The occasional car or motorbike passing by or airplane flying overhead. And if your environment is particularly quiet, you might simply notice the sound of silence, that sound of stillness that's there. And regardless of the volume of the sound or the quality of the sound, simply noticing how sounds are always present moment experiences. And so, if at any point during the meditation we find we get distracted by thoughts, we can always return back to the experience of sound. Resting, resting. And so while we're here resting with this present moment experience and noticing the sounds, the invitation then is to bring awareness to the feet, perhaps noticing the contact of the feet against the ground or the floor or the carpet. Inviting the muscles in the feet to relax, grow soft, rest. And then in the next breath or two, if it feels good to do so, the invitation is to bring awareness to the lower legs, from the ankles to the knees. Inviting the muscles in the lower legs to grow soft, rest. Perhaps also bringing this exploration to the upper legs, from the knees to the hips, quadriceps and thighs. Inviting the muscles in the upper legs to relax and unwind, rest. And while we're here resting, just as a reminder, if we come to an area of the body that feels activating or uncomfortable for any reason, feel free to modify the practice and move awareness to a more comfortable area of the body. Resting, resting. And so while we're here resting, resting, the invitation then, if it feels good to do so, is to bring awareness to the hands, perhaps noticing the hands resting against the body or touching each other, the arms resting against the body as well. Inviting the hands and arms to grow soft, relax, rest. And then, in the next breath or two, if it feels good to do so, the invitation is to bring awareness to the lower torso. Perhaps noticing the rising and falling of the abdomen with each breath, the lower back. It's quite common for the human body to carry tension or stress in the lower torso. And so taking a few moments here to invite the abdomen to relax, grow soft, rest. The lower back to unwind, relax. And while we're here resting, the invitation then is to include the upper torso as well. Perhaps noticing the expanding and contracting of the rib cage as you inhale and exhale. The upper back moving out as you breathe in as you breathe out. Inviting the muscles in the upper back to grow soft, relax, rest. And while we're here resting, the invitation then is to bring this exploration to the shoulders. And perhaps noticing the shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Inviting the muscles in the shoulders to relax, rest, unwind. And then, in the next breath or two, if it feels good to do so, we could bring this awareness to the back of the neck and the sides of the neck, inviting the muscles in the neck to relax, rest. Perhaps noticing too the sensations arising throughout the cheeks of the face. Letting any tension or stress that's held in the face go. And particularly noticing any tension around the lips, the nose. It's quite common to carry tension around the eyes, behind the eyes, so just inviting the eyes to soften, relax, rest. Inviting the muscles in the forehead to relax, grow soft. And gently then bringing this exploration to the top of the head, the very crown of the head. Resting, breathing. And if at any point during the meditation you should find you get distracted by thoughts, just remember that that's normal. Smilingly recognizing the distraction, and gently letting it go, and returning back to the sounds or the sensations of body or breath, reconnecting to the present moment. Resting, resting. And so while we're here resting with this present moment experience, we'll begin offering ourselves these very precious phrases of compassion. as if we were bringing ourselves a rare gift. The invitation then is to feel into the implications of each phrase. May I feel safe. May I be free from struggle. May I be free from disturbance and harm. May I live with ease. May I feel safe. May I be free from struggle. May I be free from disturbance and harm. May I live with ease. And if it's helpful, you might wish to place one hand over your heart, or perhaps both hands on the heart. Or maybe a hand on the heart and a hand on the abdomen. And again, this is simply an invitation if it feels comfortable. And once again, offering the phrases to our own hearts. May I feel safe. May I be free from struggle. May I be free from disturbance and harm. May I live with ease. May I feel safe. May I be free from struggle. May I be free from disturbance and harm. May I live with ease. Resting, resting. And if you wish to, keep offering yourself one or more of those phrases to your own heart. And perhaps noticing if there's any resistance to any of the phrases. Just remember that that's normal, and just making space for that. Noticing too if there's any warmth or opening, softening with any one of the phrases. You may not notice much or anything at all with the phrases, and in that case, just knowing that the seeds are being planted for future experiences of self-compassion. We'll go through the phrases once more, just inviting these phrases into the heart. May I feel safe. May I be free from struggle. May I be free from disturbance and harm. May I live with ease. Resting, resting. And so while we're here resting with this present moment experience, the invitation here is to let any phrases of compassion which may be lingering, just to let those move into the background of awareness. Bringing into the foreground of awareness any sounds which might be available. Perhaps noticing too sensations arising from the feet, the hands, the weight of the body against the chair or cushion or mat. Sensations arising from the shoulders, the top of the head. And then, if it's helpful, you might wish to take a deep breath or two here and just feeling into the breath. Perhaps allowing the out-breath to be slow and steady and smooth. And so in a few moments' time then, we'll begin to shift away from the guided meditation. And I'll cue that by ringing the bell 3 times. And so if your eyes were closed, you might wish to open them just slowly as you feel comfortable. There's no hurry. And sometimes it's nice after a meditation, take a few moments to stretch. I like to roll my neck after a meditation and then just to look around, sort of scanning the horizon, if you will, visually, and taking in all the colors, the objects of the room. And this is just a very quick exercise that was offered by Peter Levine, Dr. Peter Levine, who's a codified somatic experiencing healing work. Wonderful, wonderful doctor. If you're not familiar with Dr. Levine's work, I highly recommend him. Yeah. And I just want to extend an invitation here. If any questions or comments or things you'd like to share about this meditation that you just experienced, if any of that is coming up for you, you could send that over to Balanced Veterans Network. And there will be a window in my next session next month where I'll be reading some of those questions. I don't need to name any names or anything like that. If you want to remain anonymous, that's absolutely fine. But it'll be a Q&A session, essentially. I'll be reading the questions and speaking to the questions in that way. So please do feel free to send those along or sharing comments and things like that as well. Thank you. And thanks for being here. Thank you.